Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast studios and the Detroit is Different podcast. I have on a guest that just let me know, number 3. And he actually may be one of the very few people in that rare air. And it only would be right because he's the original guest for the Detroit is Different podcast. Before many of us knew what podcasting was in America and definitely communities like ours. But I'm glad that it started with him and also it's going to continue with him. And we're going to always need to check in almost annually with him. He's one of my big homies. Big homie is a way that I say mentors. Person I look up to for the work that he's done. Definitely the words he shares, but more so the work in the way that it impacts community. All right? Baba Malik Yakini, how you doing?
What up, though? It's glad to be back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, so much to talk about, but we're going to start with this. All right? Everybody's like, Baba Malik, he's going to retire. He's going to get out the game. What is he doing? Has he turned his back on the community? Has the community drove the man away from the community? So can you please give a preface how this whole concept of you being in this space and doing what I saw as always. You have created platforms for other people to assume different roles of leadership and everything. But what's happening in the life of Baba Malik right now?
Well, first I want to start by giving praise to the Creator and our ancestors, which I always do, always live in a state of gratitude. I'm 67 years old, and
for real?
Yeah, for real.
Wow, wow! Now that right there is a heck of a testament because you could probably say you are 45 on up if you wanted to.
Well, I'm 67 for real, and so I've been working jobs a long time, and so I never intended to work a job all of my life. I'm in the Black liberation movement my whole life and beyond. But I never intended to work a job all of my life. And so, frankly, I've been serving as executive director of Detroit Black Community Food Security Network since 2010. And I've wanted to retire, so-called retire, meaning that, I don't have a job. And, I need to figure out what I'm living off of besides Social Security. But I've been wanting to do that for a while, but I couldn't do it because we've had this big project, the Detroit Food Commons, that we've been working on. And so now as we are nearing the finish line on the Detroit Food Commons, and I can see light at the end of the tunnel, I am preparing to retire as executive director of Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. So what's going to happen is in January of 2024, I'm going to go out on a 1-year sabbatical. There's a foundation, the Calliopeia Foundation out of California, a small family foundation who has been providing some support to DBCFSM for the last several years, has agreed to pay my modest salary and health care for 1 year so that I can take a sabbatical, and I'm going to be working on a book that I've been trying to do for a number of years, just haven't had the time to really sit down and focus on the writing.
Okay.
So 2024 for me is all about writing and, reflecting on my 50-plus years of activism in the Black movement and really trying to make meaning of that for myself, but also as an elder trying to summarize some of those lessons so that other people who are doing the work, who are younger than me, can glean whatever they feel is of value in this book once it comes out.
Okay, so a lot of game, as always, that you just gave. But sabbatical, the first time that I heard of a person going on sabbatical was another one of my big homies that It was, and surprisingly, he hasn't been here, but I'm calling you out. You're coming soon. Baba Daoud Muhammad, when he said, I'm going on sabbatical and I'm going to focus on my artistry. And I'm like, all right, what's a sabbatical and what's going on and how is this happening? Sabbatical for you. You mentioned the writing, but just the whole process of that. Break that down for us because that's just something that, in our community, we're just not used to hearing it.
Yeah, I'm not used to it either. And, I think it's more used in like the academic world. People who are in academia, they take a sabbatical for a year, for so many months, maybe not a whole year. And it's really a period of rest, and it's derived from the Hebrew word Saba, which means seven, and in Kiswahili the same term. But we know the term Sabbath. Most people know that, and so in the Judeo-Christian tradition, supposedly, God, if you want to use that term, made the world in 6 days, and on 7 days, God was so tired that He, so-called, had to rest. So that term Sabbath has kind of come down to us through the Judeo-Christian tradition, meaning this day of rest. But it's derived from it being the seventh day of the week, depending on how you counting the days. So a sabbatical is a period where you can rest. And, for people who have been intensely involved in activity, for activity to have meaning, you also have to have periods of inactivity. You have to have times when you can sit down and you can assess what is the value in the activity that you've been engaged in. And so that's part of what I'm going to do. I'm going to, reflect on, again, my 50-some years of activism. What does all that mean? What are the high points? What are the low points? What are the victories? What are the things that we didn't do so well? And I'm going to commit a lot of that to writing. And part of it is, as I said, to share with the larger audience, so they can glean whatever they think is of value from my years of activism. But also part of it is for my own life, just for me to assess and reflect and to make meaning of the last several decades of intense activity.
All right, so the reflection of it, that definitely is powerful. But also just you mentioned Detroit Black Food Security Network in that position. But let's go back a little bit further through those years. And I know you've been thinking about this before. So before that, 2010, you assumed that position. Rest in peace, Charity. I remember Charity was like heavy in the work, and I'm satelliting a lot of this, especially around the African-centered community in Detroit, somewhat the progressive thought, liberal-based community of Detroit. And then it's still impactful as people still speak to Charity's works and that passion. And it's like, okay, it will be there and anchored with Baba Malik and where that goes. Before that, what was you said working all your life. Where were you working before that?
Before I answer that question, let me finish the answer to the first question you asked me, which is after the year sabbatical in January of 2025, then I'm going to so-called retire. Which basically means I will not have a job or a paycheck, and I'll be living off of Social Security and whatever else I can hustle up on. Okay. And, and in anticipation of this, I've been developing streams of income for the last several years, including the band Mollywop that I lead. Part of the reason for putting that together was to create another stream of income because I knew this day was coming when the paychecks would be gone. But back to the current question. What did I do before 2010 when I started serving as executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network? Well, first of all, in 2006, I was a founder, and I think it would be fair to say the primary convener of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. I had this idea in my head that I put on paper, called a meeting in February of 2006, and I called together about 40 people I knew who were involved in either agriculture, in some way, gardening, farming, who were into food and health, or just people who wanted to see more Black self-reliance and a more robust closed loop community, closed loop economy in our community.
So I'm gonna give, as I always do, like a little bit of a picture when I pull out what you just shared. So certain people for the Kuji Chakalia, the self-determination of a Black community. Yes. So it's a group there. Yes. A group of people that are into agriculture and gardening and growing for themselves. Yes. And then a group of people that were...
There were some people who were interested in food co-ops. There were some people who were interested in food as a modality for us achieving optimal health.
And that collection, I bring that about because... sometimes as from the start, inception, we think that everyone must be walking with the same mission, vision, and purpose statement, whereas it may be other other points of interest that bring a group together.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to.
Yeah. But still, all of those, we were able to put them within a framework. Those things weren't antagonistic to each other, opposed to each other. They were all kind of complementary parts of a whole. They ended up being the nucleus of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. So Charity was one of those co-founders, as well as Mama Hanifa Ajuman and Baba Al Severs, Mama Janet Severs, and several others. All those 40 people who came to that initial meeting became the co-founders of the organization.
Okay. And during that time, because I'm just walking through that 50 years of work, because that does sound like a daunting task, and how I've seen your work involves a lot of creativity, even from the other interviews. And I would say that probably that first interview, though the audio quality, I wish I wish I was with this equipment with our first interview. But it's one of my most listened to podcasts to this day. To this day, people still listen to Detroit is Different One. It's with Baba Malik. And you give a lot of game and just break things down through life. And I kind of just wanted to walk through that path. So you said working jobs, when I feel like you've been more involved in creating the job that you work.
Yeah, well, so prior to that, for I think about 21 years, I was a co-founder and executive director of Insortima Institute. And so we started that school on November 29th, 1989. And truth be told, I'm starting to talk about this a bit more in the current time period. I was teaching at Aisha Shule. In fact, I was teaching in exchange for the tuition for my children. And there was a conflict that occurred, a difference of opinion that resulted in, frankly, me being put out of Aisha Shule. And so, frankly, I had no intention on starting a school, but because I was put out, my children were put out. And by the way, let me say this early on, that within a year of that, myself and Mama Imani Humphrey, my Jegna, my big homie, we patched up the difference, and we worked in conjunction with each other from that point through the end of her life, and I'm still bigging her up now. So I just want to, point to the positive part of that. Yes, there was a split, but we worked through the split, and it became a positive thing for the community, because then instead of just having one African-centered school to choose from, well, actually there were a couple others, I'm sorry, to be fair, but instead of having, they had more options, I'll put it like that.
I want to say this too, in that as we reflect. Mama Imani is another person that, rest in peace, I wish I would have had the opportunity to have her on Detroit is Different, but as I build what I'm building here with the assistance and support of others. So when I say the I is a collective I. I just have so much more respect for you and Mama Imani. Like, doing anything for 1 year is very difficult in our community with the challenges of what we face. But to carry it on and build upon that legacy and effectively impact families, because that's what school building does.
Yes.
And also, when you speak to that, we can have differences. We can part ways at times and then come back. And as we come back, sometimes through the difference and that separation, it gives that time to reflect, that time to think, and then that time to grow, and then have a better understanding, as I'm sure after a year of running a school, you had a whole new respect for school management
for sure.
and school execution.
So some of the things that really led to the split were some criticisms I had of the way Mama Imani was doing certain things, and certainly after assuming the mantle of an African-centered school, I had a greater understanding as to why she was doing certain things that I was critical of. So I grew, no doubt. And, I think she grew as well. And, so by the end of her life, she was calling me her son. And, we had a very, very, very close relationship, and I will always big her up. I stand on her shoulders. She and Mama Inamoy Kafiri Hill were giants in terms of being black institution builders. And so I was fortunate to kind of sit at their knee and watch their example and watch their tireless dedication year after year after year after year, going through all kind of adversity, moving from building to building. One thing that stands out in my mind is one year, maybe 1983 or so, the day before school opened at Aisha Shule, I remember seeing Mama Imani and Mama Inamoy down on their hands and knees painting lockers. And there were nobody else around. None of the people that I at Kwanzaa, chanting the Nguzo Saba, none of the people who were at African Liberation Days shouting, none of those people were around. It was Mama Imani and Mama Inamoy on their hands and knees. And they were elder sisters then, on their hands and knees painting these lockers. And that really impacted my mind and really helped me understand the dedication that is necessary for Black institution building.
Well, in more respect, it's so interesting as I add that as another layer of a story to the path that Mama Imani walked. I started my journey, though I finished at Northwestern, but I started my journey at King High School. Mama Imani was an instructor at Eastern before it was King High School, and she was there with one of my German teacher, Frau Ellis. And Frau Ellis would speak, like, after she found out I went to Aisha Shule, she would tell some stories about the type of instructor she was when Mama Imani was a DPS. So I take those stories of, like, her always pushing to get more Black history on into the schools. Then I hear the stories of when Reverend Dan Aldridge was there, when Dan spoke and I interviewed him. And he was saying, yeah, Mama Imani was, like, heavy. And I joined with her. And it's like, let's talk and let's introduce this. Even the things that were happening in South Africa. And then as that moves forward in the push, and then one of your brothers, rest in peace, Kwame Kenyatta, spoke of all of the movement across DPS to have Black history inside the schools. And many of the students like himself that were at Cooley were expelled from all DPS. And it was Mama Imani that took a wing of students and taught them with Black history and everything needed to get a GED, because at that point in time, DPS was like, oh, you're ostracized. You're locking the building up just to have Black history here. So the relationship between African-centered education, Black history, runs deep throughout American history, as we're looking at the goofiness happening in Florida right now. But it definitely is incepted deep in the roots of Detroit. So my thought process is like, oh, what was happening at Wayne State around the time that Daryl Dawsey and many others were organizing, Errol Henderson and others. I was thinking that this was like unprecedented. Then you get a couple other discussions. It's like, oh nah, this had some history to it. This had some legs to it. And Mama Imani was there saying like, okay, we're protesting, but we're also going to continue educating and reanimate that education in the light of Blackness. So it's just, that's why I love this show, because it's like I can pull those nuggets out and it's like, wow.
Kwame Kenyatta. So I met Kwame Kenyatta in 1975. We were both attending Eastern Michigan University. Mm-hmm. And we had both graduated the year before. Excuse me, I graduated in 1974 from Mumford. And he had graduated from the school that Mama Imani was running. I think it's called Oakland Prep, where she had some classrooms over at St. Cecilia on Livernois and I forgot the exact cross street, just north of Grand River. And so that's where Kwame graduated from high school after getting expelled from Cooley. And so he had this exposure to Mama Imani already. But I had known her son. I had known her son, Pili, or Michael Simanga is now his name, who was the head of the Detroit chapter of the Congress of African People, the organization founded by Amiri Baraka, or many people know him as the poet Leroy Jones. And some of the people who were involved in CAP, such as Shirikiana Aina, and Shirikiana is now married to Haile Garima, the filmmaker who made the famous film Sankofa, and together they run the Sankofa bookstore in Washington, D.C. I had gone to high school with her. She was in the Black Student Caucus when I was attending Cass Tech, and Jametta Boyce, who now runs Detroit Parent Network. We went to high school together, and they already knew Pili, and they were involved in some of the activities Pili. So even before I met Mama Imani, I was kind of connected to her through her progeny.
Wow, that adds other layers. So with that, before that, I'm guessing instructor at Aisha Shule when we go through the work journey.
Yeah, well, again, I was working not for money at Aisha Shule. I was working because I had 2 children who I think at that time were in the 3rd and 5th grade, and I couldn't afford the tuition. And so Mama Imani allowed me to work teaching math in the afternoon and in exchange for tuition for my children. And I had a work arrangement with her for a number of years to move my children through the school. At one point, I was running the after-school program. As after the teachers left and students were waiting to be picked up, I would do that. But during much of the time, I was teaching in Detroit Public Schools myself.
Where at?
I was teaching for several years, I taught at Ruth Ruff Adult Education Center, which is on the corner of Woodward and Livernois at Chicago. It became, in later years, the Malcolm X Academy. And the building is now closed and abandoned. But that was my first teaching job in 1979, I believe it was. I was hired by Detroit Public Schools, and I taught adult basic education, which is basically teaching English, reading, and math to students who read on a 3rd or 4th grade level. So their skills were so low that they couldn't get in GED classes yet because their skills weren't high enough. So I was preparing them to be able to take GED classes. So I was teaching adults who were either my age, slightly younger, or older. On one occasion, in fact, a student came and enrolled in the class who was one of my classmates at elementary school. So that was kind of an irony. But yeah, so I taught there for maybe 6 or 7 years.
Let's talk a little bit about that experience. And it's so unique you bring that place up because at one point in time, that same school, if I remember correctly, like Chicago and it's like Chicago 96.
Exactly.
And Livernois,
Yes.
that area.
Yes.
That at one point in time, that was the last chance school that Reverend Horace Sheffield was running. And I was instructing a studio class because I've done some studio classes at last chance schools. And for people that don't know, okay, you have school. You have second chance school, which is night school. A lot of people at Northwestern would go to night school, meaning I can pick up some credits and make things up. Last chance is when you get kicked out of school and night school. You're in last chance school, which is its own cultural experience.
Yeah.
What was your experience like being there and being basically like the same age and just the populace at that time being in that position?
You know, I always had a very good rapport with the students. Only problems I ever had in DPS is with the administrators. And the students were cool. And I was bringing this red hot black fire, using Malcolm X's autobiography as a text. And, I had images all around the room of Malcolm and Asada and all kind of folks. And the students, my students was feeling it. And then also while I was at the school, I actually started a musical group called Making It Together, where I was playing guitar. We had a student enrolled in the school playing bass, another student who played drums, and then we had several students who sang, rapped, and some of them did breakdancing. And so we started performing at the school. I think there was a talent show.
You
at the
said
school.
79?
Well, this was maybe 82, 83.
So this is early hip hop.
Early hip hop.
And okay, so they introduced breakdancing. Have you seen breakdancing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was up on hip hop from from the beginning of the recorded hip hop at least.
Okay.
I used to hang out in Brooklyn in 76, 77, 78 in Prospect Park, and I didn't know, but hip hop was kind of emerging
right
then. But I wasn't there for long periods of time. I would go visit in the summer. But so I was always aware of hip hop from the first record that came out, and I was following it. And, it was a new musical trend, and I wanted to be part of it.
Okay.
And so this group, it wasn't totally a hip hop group because we also did some reggae. We did some blues. Like one of the hits we always used to perform was called the GED Blues. And one of the brothers...
that sounds interesting.
Yeah, one of the brothers who was in my class, he was from the South, and he was an older student, and so he sang the GED blues.
Okay.
And then we had some other students who were younger, and they were doing breakdancing, and, and some who were singing, some who were rapping. So we were using all of that, but we had, the raps everything was designed to enhance the educational experience. For example, I wrote something called Grammar Rock, not like the TV show, but I wrote a song teaching the parts of speech. For example, one of the lyrics went like this: "We've come to tell you all about nouns. If you learn this lesson, you'll really be down. A noun names a person, a place, or a thing, like a book on a table or a diamond ring." Now, if you want to master grammar, then have no doubt there are 4 types of nouns you must learn about: proper, common, collective, and abstract. If you learn these nouns, you'll be on the right track. Yo! And so we had a live band playing while we had people rapping, and we had break dancers and it was an exciting show. And so eventually what happened is the adult education department took us on and put us on a tour going around the city to recruit people for adult basic education classes, because we were kind of speaking the language that young people could understand.
Ain't that something weird? That's kind of like, I always sometimes go back and look at when I found out. The police, even though Lord knows, the police. But when the police used to have, the Detroit Police Department had this rap group called the Blue Pigs, where they used to, they used to go around and rap. It was weird because it's like, for cops to embrace the whole concept of being a pig is weird within itself.
Well, the Blue Pigs started before hip hop. Let me say that.
Okay, all right. Wow.
They started in the probably late 1960s, and they continued through the 70s. And so they didn't start out doing rap. They started out doing other musical forms, and they just adapted as they evolved.
So it was like a Motown version of the Blue Pigs, like in the 60s. They was like, and they took the Four Tops moves. But so it seems like you'd have had a tight relationship. And then also, how common was it for electives and like artistry? As I remember, you just assume that when they think like, okay, it's adult ed, all you're gonna do is math, science, and English. Like, how often and common was it for artistry to be involved in the school?
Well, this wasn't something that the school created and maybe not even kind of semi-endorsed, because they saw I was developing this relationship with the students. But this was all after school. This wasn't something that took place in the classroom. Right, so I was able to use my rapport being a classroom teacher and knowing many of the students in the school to recruit. But then we would rehearse in the gym after school, and then at some point we started rehearsing there was a studio on Livernois near Finkel, and brother Frank, man, his name is escaping me. Excuse me, but brother Imani, who's the drummer. I think he was here with us.
Oh, Baba Frank.
Yeah, Baba Frank. Imani's father was running there with Cornbread Productions. He was running that studio. So at one point we were rehearsing in that studio. That's how I first met him, after we couldn't rehearse at the school anymore. Then at some point we started rehearsing at my house, So it wasn't exactly the school, doing it. It was more something I was doing. And because of the rapport I had with the students at the school, I was able to pull them into it. So the students loved me. I had no issues with them at all. I would definitely say I was probably one of their favorite teachers in the school.
I would imagine, but I'd assume a school like that, isn't it like aren't you getting like new students every other month or something like that?
Sometimes you get new students every day. Frankly, there were constantly new students coming in, constantly students dropping out. But what we were doing with the arts was a way of anchoring them and keeping them in and keeping their interest. And it developed, we developed a very tight camaraderie among the people who were in the group. And there were maybe, 15 or 20 students. It wasn't a small group. There were lots of people involved in this. And it was a very memorable experience. We had a concert we did at Wayne County Community College when it was on Greenfield near Joy Road. And, we had the big auditorium, and we had a back projection screen where we had slides on the screen and, dancers, and it was a full show. And so it was an experience like the students had never had before. And also we were able to teach these both academic concepts, but also always infused in this is always this black consciousness.
Okay, and I have other questions because I also know you're a heck of a player, and Lord knows, talk about the discussions you could get from Baba Malik.
Guitar player. Be clear.
I
be
guess
clear about that.
Guitar player. Yes. So you were in other bands at the time.
Yeah. At the time, and it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly what band I was in at what time. but I know definitely I was in a band called Akko Ben with myself, brother Kamal Amin Ra, and brother Prana Ananda. Many people know his son Ayende Ananda. Prana played bass, and he had come out of playing in a group called Nature's Divine that had some commercial success. And then Kamal Amin Ra, many people knew him from the drum and dance scene. And so we formed a 3-man reggae band, which was unheard of, bass, guitar, and drums. Kamal was playing drums, Prana was playing bass, I was playing guitar. And I had all kind of effects on the guitar to kind of, make the sound bigger. And we played many, many, many shows with this 3-person reggae band and bringing this revolutionary form of reggae, to people in Detroit and not just Detroit. We played in Atlanta at the National Black United Front. And so, but mainly in the city of Detroit.
I just meant to say, because, sometimes being in a band can be territorial. So they're saying like, hey, man, what you doing? You doing this after school thing, man? We got these other gigs.
No, it wasn't like that at all. Okay. In fact, I was able to bring my comrades that I was playing reggae with into, and they serve as guest artists, like my brother Kareem Baki, the concert I was just describing at Wayne County Community College. Kareem was a guest artist, and he came and sang one of the songs. So it wasn't any conflict at all. They loved what was going on, and many of them participated.
Okay, so before that, I'm guessing, where work before that?
Immediately before that. So again, that would have been starting in September of 1979. And interestingly, my very first day on the job, there was a teacher strike. So here I am having my first so-called official job, and I had went in, although I had changed my name prior. Malik Yakini was not the name I was born with. I had changed my name prior to applying for this job, but I didn't tell the principal of the school who hired me until after he hired me. I used my old name until after I was on the payroll, because I didn't think he would hire me if he knew my name was Malik Yakini. And so he felt a little tricked, frankly, because of that. But my very first day on the job, there was a teacher strike. And here I am thinking, okay, I got my first so-called real job, real paycheck. And, I got ready to walk into school, and this teacher, Helen Ray, she was like, you better not cross this picket line. And I didn't, and ended up being out there on the picket line my very first day working for DPS. And then myself and Helen Ray became very close friends, and she became one of the founders of the Black Reading Month Committee, that continues to promote the September's Black Reading Month campaign every year. Some people might know her daughter, Meza Komet, who's in the community and has been in a wheelchair for several years because she was shot.
All right. Well, I can't think of a more Baba Malik story of the first day on the job than than walking in and then getting into the protest. That's I can't think of a more apropos story. So before that, I'm guessing it's just the jobs that you can come up with.
Well, so before that, the job immediately before that, I worked at a place called Vantage Point Youth Development Center, and I forgot where it was when I first started working there. I can't remember the street it was on. I think it was on West Warren, actually. Now that I think about it, West Warren near American, but then they moved to Grand River near. I can't remember the name of the street either, but it was a YBI territory.
Yeah. And
this was during the time when, and the name of the street is escaping me, but you would walk down the street, it was almost like a grocery store. I mean, there was so many drugs being sold and cars going back and forth. So I was in that neighborhood in the thick of that, the late 70s, 78 or so, I think is when I started working there. And the Errol Flynn's and all that, that was during that big time period. And so our job at Vantage Point was to try to reach young people and to try to counsel them. So I ran youth programs at that.
So 1 second.
Yeah.
This was a youth center.
North Martindale is the street I'm trying to think of.
So this is a youth center. And I went to Northwestern, very familiar with that whole footprint.
Yeah.
In the middle of, I guess at the time, like the opulence of the game. Yeah. Is happening concurrent with the center looking to provide opportunities outside of this.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And again, we were in the thick of it. North Martindale is the street I was trying to think of. And I often would walk down North Martindale on my way home. I would sometimes walk from Grand River down North Martindale to Joy Road, and then Joy Road to Dexter, maybe catch the Dexter bus home. And I'm telling you, it was in the thick of it, man. It was crazy watching how bold and brazen these young brothers were in selling heroin at the time, and they had it stamped with various branding, brands and what have you, real dope, I think was one, and
Top side, a lot of like heroin's in the world of narcotic, or now we call it boy. I guess that would be the street term now. But heroin's a little bit different than like a lot of other drugs. It's like the way it's stamped, the way it's cut. It's branding. So the people that use dope are looking for whatever that brand is. It's a scene in what's that? The Denzel Washington American Gangster movie. Talking about Frank Lucas. Where where he has this exchange with the Nicky Barnes character by Cuba Gooding Jr., where it's like, yo, man, you can't rebrand my stuff because it's like marketing. It's like Coca-Cola, but that's the.
Yeah, so we're in the thick of all of that, and I was maybe 1978. I was like 22 years old, so I was a young person myself, and trying to.
I'm surprised they're not trying to serve you. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I'd assume they're like, "Hey, you on the street? Hey, what's up?"
Well, I was walking, and it was people were driving up in cars trying to make the purchases. It wasn't so much people walking on the street, But yeah, so I did that in 1978. I graduated from college in 1978. Also, I went to Eastern Michigan University from 1974 to 78, and I worked multiple jobs while I was in college, also including working at 2 gas stations. One was in Ypsilanti on Michigan Avenue, and one was in Detroit on Michigan Avenue, also near Wyoming. And I'll just share a little bit about those 2 experiences. I also got Kwame Kenyatta hired at the Clark Station on Michigan Avenue near Wyoming. In Michigan at Lanyo, actually, is where it was. And so I worked one shift, Kwame worked another shift. But I got stuck up then at that gas station. This was back during the time where a gas station attendant had to actually pump the gas. You would go out to the car, how can I help you? And people might say, I want my oil changed, or I want $5 regular or whatever. And so you were a service attendant. We weren't doing repairs on cars, but we were certainly doing things like changing oil, changing transmission fluid, pumping gas, and what have you. And so, you're kind of vulnerable when you're in the station by yourself. I'm 22 years old, 20 maybe at that time when I worked at that station. And, some cats rolled up on me with guns and they robbed the place. And, that was that. But another occasion, Kwame Kenyatta held a naming ceremony in the lot of in the parking lot kind of the gas station. There was some sister in the community that, I think he kind of liked. And Kwame had a knack for naming sisters Akiba. Akiba is a name that means a gift preserved for future. And so I think he named his sister Akiba, hoping that at some point in the future he might be able to get with her or whatever. This is the inside track. This story has never been told. I can guarantee you.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself like, hey, that's
because nobody else was there but me and him, so nobody else could tell you the story. But the Clark station I worked at in Ypsilanti, I worked there for 1 week, and when I went at the end of the week to get my money, the owner of the station pulled out a gun on me and said, "This is all you got coming," and chased me down the street with the gun. I never did get my money from that.
I would assume, that was probably a better thing. Said, okay, I'm living. Let that man keep that.
Yeah, exactly.
And now I guess I want to just ask just historically, because like that area, like Lanyo, Michigan, I know it is like Southwest Detroit. Was it? But that's a part of Southwest Detroit where you still have like a mix of like a Mexican community and a black community, and it's actually some Dominicans over there too. But what was the pulse of that community at the time?
About the same as what you just described. It was a mix of Mexicans and African Americans. A lot of African Americans lived over there who went to Chatsey. And actually, the reason I got the job is because I had a girlfriend who went to Eastern who lived on Lanyo near Michigan. Okay. And so I was over there all the time, as I look back on my life, certain things occurred in my life because I was chasing after some woman or whatever, So that's how I ended up getting the job. But she went to Chatsey, and there were a number of black people in that area that went to Chastity, but there were also a number of Mexican folks who lived in the area.
Yeah, so now that we got that, like you say, like I guess that's the work, and with it, almost so many things that I connect with our other stories.
Can I add one more thing? The post office, right?
Oh man,
So
okay.
I worked at the post office in either 1975 or 76. I can't remember.
Okay, what did you do
during the summer? I was loading trucks on the ground floor. Big 18-wheelers.
In the summer?
Yes, it was in the summer.
Oh man, that was a hot.
You would load these big duffel bags.
Yeah.
And you'd have to, throw them on the truck. And so, actually, I was a temporary employee for 89 days. And then after 89 days, they let me go because
they didn't want to hire you in.
Exactly, they would have had to pay benefits and all those kind of things. So, that's a tool the employers sometimes use. So at that time, the post office was using that tool. But interestingly, my mother and father worked at the post office. That's where they met.
Wow.
And that's where they both worked until they retired. They both worked there for 30-some years. My younger brother, who passed, unfortunately, 2 years ago at the age of 58, excuse me, he also worked at the post office for a while.
That's deep. The main post office, I'm guessing, because if you're loading trucks and stuff like that, I'm assuming there.
Yeah, what they call the general post office on 4th Street.
Okay, so
I worked midnights, which is crazy, because I would report to work. I think midnight or 11 o'clock or something late, and work throughout the night, and then try to sleep during the day, which is very difficult trying to sleep during the day.
I've had shifts like that, truck driving. I had some routes like that. Yeah, it's odd. I learned from my aunt Shirley, rest in peace. That was an RN for so long, because she always chose to work nights and just got used to it, because nobody else really wanted to. That connection was like a overnight, every day, like blacking things out, being like blacked out windows, setting everything up for proper sleep, and like it's odd because everybody else's day is starting and your day is kind of ending.
Yeah,
it was interesting, really. It almost felt like I was working 24 hours.
Can I share a few more quickly work experiences?
Please do.
So my first job was probably as a paperboy. I had a free press route no, that wasn't my first job. My first job was working with my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who owned a printing shop, ironically, on West Warren near American, where I told you Vantage Point was located some years later. Earlier, I worked there because my grandfather owned a printing shop, and I worked in the printing shop. So as a 13-year-old, I would leave post-junior high school, walk from Puritan to Livernois, catch the Livernois bus down to West Warren, then catch the Cross Island bus down to American, and then work with my grandparents. Then they would drop me off at the end of the day. And so that was a very good experience for a number of reasons. Also in high school, I worked at a store called Music Land, which had 2 stores on McNichols and Murelin, and a second store on Wyoming and Curtis. And I sold records, both 45s and LPs, and also taught guitar lessons, even though I'd only been playing guitar 2 or 3 years myself.
So it was like
But I knew enough. I knew how to read basic music, and I knew enough to start a beginner. So I could get them through book 1, part of book 2.
They're like, I want to do this Hendrix intro, and be like, hold on, let's get you here first.
So, and then the first job I had out of high school was a job at a restaurant on 7 Mile and Outer Drive washing dishes. I had that job for 1 week, and they fired me because they didn't feel I was moving fast enough or whatever.
Hey, dishwashing is, as a person that's done that before, dishwashing ain't easy.
Yeah,
it ain't easy.
So I worked a lot of jobs. Let's just put it like that.
All right, so this is unique. Working in a record store, and I worked in a record store. I've told you a little bit of that. What was it like working in a record store for you? Because I love working in a record store. That's maybe the one job I love, to the point where eventually I'm going to own a record store. I just don't know what iteration and how it's going to come together, but I'm going to own a record store eventually.
Yeah, I loved working in the record store too because I could see what was coming out. And so I was playing guitar, right? And so I was very much into music. And so as new stuff was coming out, I could hear it right away, and I loved it. I loved conversing with people about 45s, about albums, about even musical instruments. We sold cheap Japanese musical instruments, but still, I could talk to people about music, about playing drums, playing bass, playing guitar. So it was great, man. Except the one time I got stuck up there, that was the first time I had somebody put a gun in my face, and it's not a nice look to be looking down the barrel of a gun.
No.
So that was the first time I experienced that. But other than that, it was a great experience, and it was in my neighborhood. It was like 4 blocks from my house, so I would lock up and walk home each day, and a lot of people. Friends from the neighborhood would come in the record store and buy records. So it was cool, man. I loved it.
What was the hit record that you remember most that people were coming in and buying?
Well, definitely when Shaft came out, that was definitely a big seller.
I love Black Moses, Hot Buttered Soul, Isaac Hayes. Okay, so.
Yeah, but all the music that was popular at that time, the Stylistics, the Shy Lights, the whole R&B thing that was happening. You taking me back, man. I can't remember like 72, 73 what was the hits at that point in time.
Okay,
but
Shaft stuck out. Yeah,
that stood out because that was unique, And as a guitar player, none of us had ever heard a guitar play like that. Their intro, with the wah wah, and so. So Shaft was unique in a lot of ways. It was kind of groundbreaking, and Superfly, of course. That was a big hit. So all those things were out during the time I was working at that record.
And that's unique to hear that, just because I pull as I love history, especially Black history, Detroit Black history. I mean, you put those three together, I love it, and I feel like you have the historians, and I love the work that Jamon and Ken and them do. But I try to get the oral histories and how people speak to things.
Yeah.
Because when I think of Shaft and Isaac Hayes, I think of Stax. And in my mind, the way that people tell this story is as if Detroiters were so Motown that only a couple of different Stax artists would make their way into the living rooms and homes of the Detroit household.
Well, I'll tell you another group that was a big hit during that time period was the Barcades. A lot of people sleep on the Barcades. And I think the Barcades, as I remember, most of them got killed in a plane crash. But they did a lot of the horn section stuff. And I think they did some stuff for, names are...
a lot Get Down, they're... clearly, it's sometimes I just hear it and I'm okay, this arrangement sounds like they have to be in the mix of this.
And Isaac Hayes, before he came out as an individual artist, he was doing a lot of that arranging, for the Barcades and the other stuff that was coming out of Stax. So even before he became an individual artist, he was prolific in arranging.
Yeah, definitely. So this music relationship also carries you through in different ways and different waves of things.
Can I share a little bit about that?
Let's go.
Okay, so I've talked many times, maybe on this show, about going to post-junior high school and about having teachers who played Malcolm X Message to the Grassroots for us in the classroom. But they also played for us Jimi Hendrix, Band of Gypsies, and then a lot of times during lunchtime we would go to Mr. McCombs' class and he would play things for us like Muddy Waters, Lightning Hopkins. He was very much into the blues. And so my love of music really developed at Post also from being exposed to all these different genres.
That's unique. And anybody that knows me knows I love blues. The Collard Green Cook-Offs having Thornetta Davis there. And we got Luther Badman Keith. But I love blues. Like the older I get, the more... It was actually an interview I was watching Keith Richards talk about it. He was like, blues... Well, I assume Keith wasn't as inebriated, or he was more in whatever plane that Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones could be. And he was saying the way blues speaks, as you grow, you hear it differently, because it's very, to me, blues has a lot of the feeling. It's like hip hop, where sometimes it is the instrumentation and the artistry. Sometimes it is the cleanness of the vocals. Sometimes it's the lyrics, but sometimes it's an emotion. that blues captures, and I feel like rap is that too.
Yeah.
Like, because Lord knows, it'd be some rap songs my mom, rest in peace, would be like, okay, the lyrics, no, I don't like it, but she's tagging on to the emotion of it. And I feel that all music has that, but blues really, like, some of that Bobby Bland is like, it's like something's going on here. Like this is a deeper message than just the lyrics on, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a blues lover. So, for me, the musical trajectory was kind of like Hendrix. Then Hendrix took me to the blues.
Yeah.
Because Hendrix was really a glorified blues player.
He was.
And again, I had this teacher, Ronald McCombs, who loved the blues and would bring all these records and play them for us. And as I got older, by the time I was 18, 19, I used to go to his house, right? And I don't know if I should say this now, but I'm going to say it. Fuck it. And we would roll up what he called a bohemian, take a paper bag and roll it up with herb and be, listening to various types of blues records. So it was an experience. But he also would bring into the classroom and play for us John Coltrane. That's how I got hip to Coltrane. Pharoah Sanders, Leon Thomas, all that music that was emerging at that time that was part of the Black cultural revolution, I was being exposed to that. So for me, the activism and the music always went hand in hand from day one.
And as you talk about that, this is another thing when we think of like that jazz and that blues era. It's so many iterations and versions of the music in the song. Like for instance, Muddy Waters, Manish Boy. They're like, I don't know, I've heard at least about 15 different versions of it. And each version is a little bit different. And that's also kind of like James Brown. It's like some different versions because my dad loved James Brown. So like when I hear Cold Sweat, it's like I got to go to the version of Cold Sweat that I want to listen to that day because there's certain things where he's saying things in the background. There's certain ways that the horns hit where it's like, that ain't the right version that I want to hear. And I think that that's even something that's creative and unique in a sense about that style of music and the way recording was going on at the time. So this love between music and revolution, as we look at hip hop being 50, what's as a person that plays and has message inside of the music, what's the approach? Because it's good too. Mollywop is good. Because sometimes I feel like some people are focused on the message, but the artistry is not. It's like I want to like this because I like what it's saying, but it's not. How do you get that balance of like that connection?
Yeah. Well, so for many years, only thing I played was reggae. For example, Akko Ben Reggae band, I played in that one band 21 years, right? But there's many other reggae. So because reggae was such a conscious music, I almost renounced playing everything else, because reggae was so powerful to me. But, I began to reflect on why did I start playing guitar? And I started playing guitar because I liked that loud feedback and rock guitar that Jimi Hendrix was playing. And so I'm like, I don't need to renounce that because I love the message in reggae. I can have all of that. And so, in a sense, Mollywop was an attempt to bring together various genres. In fact, to tell you the truth, the impetus for Mollywop was the album by Nas and
I already know where you're going. I love that. And Damian
Marley.
Distant Relatives.
Distant Relatives, right. And
that was amazing.
Hearing how they combined the reggae and the hip hop, was really the impetus for me starting Mollywop. I wanted to create a multi-genre band, and initially it was like reggae and hip hop. But then, I love the funk. I love P-Funk. I grew up listening to all the Parliament Funkadelic stuff from the early days, from I Want to Testify. That was part of my childhood, right? And Maggot Brain and all that, coming out in 68, 69, whenever that came out. I can't remember, 70 maybe. But all of that was part of my it was in my musical DNA, and so I wanted to have a band that kind of encompassed all of those musical styles that I loved, the rock, funk, reggae. Of course, growing up in Detroit, soul was always a big thing. I grew up on the Motown sound, as a young child in the 60s. That was the soundtrack of my life. And so I wanted to incorporate all of that into a band. And so the idea in Mollywop is to have this multi-genre band that can incorporate all those different styles.
And you've succeeded, because it's hard to even categorize what Mollywop is.
It is hard. In fact, I sometimes jokingly say that we are a genre non-defined band or something like that. You know, it's like we don't really fit in those slots. You know, people ask, those promoters always ask, well, what kind of band is it? You know, those are the questions that people who sell music ask.
Yeah.
People who create music. When you create a song, you're not saying, oh, I'm creating it to fit in this slot. You know, unless people who are just driven by profit and they try to create things, you know, to go after money. But for me, the creative process doesn't come out, you know, like it's in this box or this box. It's just creativity, and whatever it is, and people can put whatever label they want to put on it. But so what I wanted to have in Mollywop for sure was the soulful vocals of Motown, and you know, my brother Al Dele, who's the leader of the vocal section, sang in the Dramatics, so he's got that whole experience he's bringing. Then I wanted to bring forward the kind of rock guitar of Hendrix that influenced me to play in the first place. I loved reggae, so we wanted to make sure we incorporated that. And I love hip-hop. I love conscious hip-hop, and we want to incorporate that. So that's kind of the approach.
And with that journey, also, you've been doing it for a while. For anybody that's led a band, man, band leadership is interesting because you're bringing together creatives. You have a lot of passion that goes into that. I don't know if you've seen it. HBO has this documentary on Donna Summer, and
I haven't seen it yet. I've been hearing about it. I plan on watching it.
It's interesting as they talk, and I've heard this different thing. Like Niles Rodgers, the producer, also member of Chic, spoke about some of the creative process that went into working with Donna and different things of the studio, and I've heard different things with different artists, whether it be Quincy Jones, whether it be you know, just the creative process, and you're bringing life to music. It's a lot. It's a lot that it's friction. Sometimes it's not friction. Sometimes it's fluid. It brings a lot, and you've been at this for a while. You know, different iterations. Sometimes people are more present. Sometimes people aren't present. The lineup changes. You know, and you still have that passion for that. You know, and that's also where I tip my hat and I say, boy, band leadership, it can be a rodeo.
It's a trip, bro.
You know?
It's a trip. And to tell you the truth, I've been kind of fighting within myself, you know, the challenges that are coming along with leading a band. Because we have a pretty big band. We usually have 9 people.
Oh, yeah.
8, 9, 10 people on stage with us. And so trying to get 8, 9, 10 people on the same page, get them to show up on time at the same place, trying to make sure everybody got their parts down, dealing with all the different personality. It can be a trip, you know. But, you know, we're in our 9th year. I just realized that the band is almost 10 years old.
That's big.
And we've been able to keep the core of it together. You know, some of the personnel, some of the vocalists have kind of moved in and out. But the core of the band has stayed the same for that entire time. But I think the thing that we all have in common is that we all want to play good music. You know, we want to be good musicians, and also we want to have music that's uplifting our community. And so I think that that dedication, you know, people in the band are conscious people, you know, so they want to bring their spiritual consciousness, their political consciousness to the band. And there's not a lot of bands where that can serve as a vehicle for doing that.
And the album is amazing. And even going through and following through with that, as I had my band, General Population, and people still come up to me like, hey, man, where's that music? And I'm like, we should have got it, just lining up for the rehearsals, the recording, the getting ready for shows. And then, you know, how shows are, you know, shows pay less. I'm sometimes the guy, I wouldn't say playing less. I try to be as honorable with working with artists, but it's not a lot of stages. You know, and it's weird because now, and sometimes in the performance realm, you can feel as though you're competing against this field in this industry where you're going against these other bands, when in reality, not necessarily looking at it like, no, we can create our own stages, and that's what Mollywop has done.
Yeah, we started out doing that because we started with no audience, right? So. Yeah. The first the very first show we did, we weren't even calling ourselves Mollywop. We called ourselves the Black Star Posse or something like that. And we performed at Dabbles. Tawana Petty asked me to do a show with her, and so I pulled this group together, and which ended up being Mollywop. But
is that, I may have some pictures from that.
Yeah,
I wonder because was that where Andwele was rapping with you all first?
Yes, and Kadiri.
And I have some pictures from that show, and I didn't, because me, my mom, and my nephew Solomon came to that because I was like, yeah, I'll pull up, and I just knew it as like, how did I end up there? Baba Idris, DJ Riot, and Jalo. I saw them one day, and they were like, yeah, man, we going to be over at Dabbles because Malik and them playing something. And I was like, but Malik did mention that he's doing something different with, like, rapping. I was thinking, like, okay, is he, like, back in Power Movement? And then I came, and I was like, this is different.
Yeah. That was our very first show.
Wow.
And so then we had to start, and really, frankly, had to start giving shows to try to create some momentum. So I started, giving shows at the Marble Bar. And interestingly, let me tell you a little background since Yusef just left out of here. Yusef had a conversation over at what is now the Mama Kua House in the yard about gentrification. And I was sitting in the circle, and there was these two white dudes in the circle, right? And afterwards, I went up and talked to them, and they said, oh, yeah, we own this club around the corner in the neighborhood, the Marble Bar. And I was like, oh, really? So, I say, I got a band, I'd be interested in coming by and seeing what it's like. And, so I went by, looked at the spot, and worked out a deal with them to, to bring the band in. And they weren't paying us. And so I had to sell tickets and then pay the band, out of the ticket sales. And kind of the way Mollywop works, I have to guarantee the band members a certain amount, period. And so, in some cases I lose, some cases I win, but the first several shows we did, shows at the Marble Bar, and that helped us to kind of build up an audience. And, I'll have Ramasu on the door handling security, making sure we didn't have any mishaps with the money, and had somebody else handling the merchandise sales and what have you. And so, we were able to kind of build up a name. And then after a while, then people started hiring us. But at first, wasn't nobody trying to hire us. We had to hire ourselves and promote the band. So, but it's a difficult thing to try to lead the band and give the show. I would rather not do both. I would rather somebody just hire us and pay us and we come and play the music.
Yeah.
But, starting off, that's not how it is.
And I remember the classic Mollywop show. I don't know if you remember that. Was at, and they're looking to open up again, Northern Lights.
Yeah, we did several shows. Well, not several, 3, 4 shows at Northern Lights. And same situation. I went in and talked to the guy, Mike, and we worked out a deal where, we got the door, and that's how I paid the band. And, again, it exposed us to people and gave us experience performing on stage in front of people. So those were all very good experiences.
So, where this is leading, I'm sure music is going to play a role in this time. So it may be writing some
post-retirement.
No, I'm talking about in 2024. I see some lyrics and some music going alongside with some of the words going to paper for the book.
Yeah, the book is probably going to have some lyrics in it also. I don't think it's going to be just a traditional book. But you mentioned lyrics. I'm writing lyrics all the time, and now I put stuff on my phone. So I'm just gonna read a couple things.
There we go.
This is like raw. Probably this stuff don't even rhyme, but I've been trying to figure out how to capture some of my own life story. Anyway, I walk with the D-Town swag, manifesting all the swaggy you never had. I'm shaped by the city we call the D, blackest city in America, the 313. You might wonder who taught me how. You might wonder who taught me how I got on this path. I had teachers who dropped science, so here's the math. At post-junior high school, there was Pete and McCombs. They taught us history and culture till we made it our own. Anyway, just trying to capture some of my own life story in lyrics. But, I'm constantly writing lyrics down and trying to figure out. Here's another verse. My teacher and road dog, Kalindi Iyi, a warrior's warrior, y'all don't feel me. In case you're wondering, here's the clarity. We had mad friction, but I'm still praising charity. questions and answers, you might be curious. That first Molly Wop joint was dedicated to Sirius, to our brother Kadiri. So anyway, just, trying to drop lyrics. One of the things I've been trying to work on, though, also is trying to figure out how to write lyrics that are not so direct and are more obscure and cause people to think. Instead of just saying, black people need liberation and, go join a black organization. When people come to a club,
because that can be kind of,
it's
like
preachy.
I said.
Nobody want to hear that. So, I've been trying to figure out how do I write lyrics that are, again, less obscure. In fact, oftentimes I write lyrics that seem to be about one thing, but if you dig a little bit deeper, they're about something else. For example, I wrote this song called, what's the name of it? I'm sorry, forgive me. Tired of Your Lies. And we've actually recorded, we didn't release it. We used to do it a lot with Simone Winter singing lead on it. But it would seem on the surface that it's a love song, a person talking about they're tired of their lover lying to them. But it's really a song about kind of this system, right, lying to us. And a lot of times you have to decipher the lyrics. So I've been trying to get more off into, how we write songs like that aren't so bam, 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 just hitting people in the head with black conscious lyrics, but the black conscious lyrics are there, but it's kind of underneath the surface. Wow.
Well, definitely, this is, as always, a powerful discussion. You drop so much game. And give so much knowledge. Last time I remember, and I even took that clip where we were talking about capitalism and everything. That was a classic back and forth. You sent me something from Richard Wolff and everything. You all know, it's like I got to keep sharp on this. Is some of the things I'm seeing in my journey hit me where I'm beginning to have a lot more respect for the path of so many elders. And then also in this, 67, that's it's hard to believe and humbling. I have this question as one of the things that, like, I had this cross to bear. I talked to Nandi, poet laureate. Shout out Nandi. She said, "What's up to you?" earlier, and I think, like, in our journeys, like, I was like, we're on the same page, but we're playing like some different roles. Nandi, I think, is looking, as she says, to challenge the elders more, to be more present with some of the things happening in struggle now, and the ways that certain people approach struggle now, and I find myself kind of on the opposite side of the street, feeling as though it's a lot of people that are misinterpreting some of the reasoning for the backwardsness in society that does exist, and having more of the respect for the elders. As you look at the pulse, and this is a tough question to ask, that's why I'm giving this long ass intro to it. As you look at the pulse of movement now, when you think of your iterations and growth through movement, what have been some of the biggest changes in the role you feel like you can play in being of service to black people in the black community?
Since you gave a long-ass intro, I'm going to give a long-ass preface to my answer, too.
There we go.
And say that I think to have a holistic community, that we need both elders and young people and all ages in between. And certainly most societies have recognized that elders are the holders of the traditional wisdom in many ways. And I think elders continue to play that role. But also what I've seen in my own life experience is that many of the people who are in my age range who came through the black movement at the time I came through it, many are stuck, as far as I'm concerned, in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. They got stuck there and they can't figure out how to get out of that. And so in some ways have rendered themselves irrelevant in the current time period. And so elders need young people in order to continue to challenge our ideas, to continue to see ourselves and to see the world in new ways. Likewise, young people need elders to ground them in history and to ground them in actual real life experience. And so it's a circle. We all need each other, and we need to create these mechanisms where elders and young people are working together side by side and sharing the ideas, because neither one of us is correct. There's a constant kind of evolution of ideas about how we change our condition, and we need the input from all these different age groups to do that. I have seen a dangerous, I think, cleavage in recent years. In fact, some black liberation groups have said outright, don't trust people over 30. And some of the left-leaning groups that have been influenced by the white left, I think have pushed this idea that young people need to come in and just kind of slash and burn, and it doesn't matter if we destroy the institutions that were built or the organizations that were built. And so sometimes some young people, I think, come into an organization with an approach which I think can be destructive. Now, at the same time, and I'm always seeking for balance. I think, as I mentioned, I think a lot of older people need to be challenged, and we need younger people who are coming and challenging ideas, but we have to find a way to do it in a way that doesn't create antagonistic contradictions, but allows us all to grow. There's a dangerous cleavage, I think, developing in the black movement around gender and the gender politics, and I'll say that certainly, I have grown tremendously in my view of gender over the last 10 years or so, and the various ways in which gender is expressed. And, I've evolved tremendously in that regard. Many of my peers have not, frankly.
Yeah.
And so younger people who are coming into the movement and who have a totally different view of gender than people in their 60s or 70s are often frustrated by the stagnation of thought of older people, and many of the older people feel like, I ain't grow up with all that, and, I don't want to necessarily, I'm not going to change the view I had all the time, about men and women, and, so so people kind of get in their own corners, and it creates, I think, a very dangerous cleavage that I think we need to find a way to work through. So, one of the things, and you asked me about my particular role, what I'm seeing more and more is that my role is as a maybe a bridge between the very intense period of political struggle in the late 1960s and early 70s, when I came of age, and that's the time period that shaped me and that molded many of my ideas. I see myself as a bridge between that time period and many of the activists in the current time period. And I think writing the book that I'll be doing in the next year or so is part of that, to share those lessons so that those younger activists can glean whatever they find of value in those experiences.
I like that you shared that, because in today's culture, and this could be young and old, like the whole concept of cancel culture.
Yeah.
Legacies of people are being reanimated, but to me, also just adding humanity to a lot of people, meaning that these people were not above critique, not above fault, not above doing something wrong.
Precisely.
But also to know that a person can be nuanced, I think I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you totally. Humanizing people, because we have this idealistic notion of leaders that they're supposed to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right? And no human being is perfect. Everybody's going to fail the test if that's the criteria that we're using. They're human. They have faults. They can do very, very good things, but also they have faults.
Yeah.
For example, James Bevel, in the last a couple of months, or last month or so, they've been talking about the children's march that occurred in, I think it was Birmingham, Alabama, 60 years ago or so. And, James Bevel was a tremendous leader in the civil rights movement. But at the end of his life, he ended up in prison because he was accused of molesting some of his daughters. Mm-hmm. And, so, how do you hold that? Do you throw out his legacy and say, well, we're not going to study that and we're not going to uplift him at all, because of the dastardly things he did, Same with Dr. King, and the FBI clearly tried to use some of this against him.
Yeah.
Did we say we're going to throw out Dr. King's legacy because he might have had some dalliances with other women? Do we not listen to Miles, because he assaulted Cicely Tyson? I don't know, and I'm not advocating one position or the other.
I was going to say, I think that this is where critical thinking and thought process needs to come into play, and understand the balance. And then even also understand like where, I guess, people say a man of their day, like, because culturally things were different. Because I can only imagine, I'm surprised I've never asked you this, but as you dove deeper into African-centered culture, African-centered consciousness, and tapping into some of the things you're doing, I can only imagine like maybe your mom, your dad, your grandparents were looking like, all right, what are you doing? What's going on? And I'm sure that was probably very prevalent throughout your generation at the time.
Yeah.
And some people was like, you know what? Because they're not going to call me my African name altogether. Yeah. I'm not going back home for nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some firm stances were taken then, like a lot of firm stances being taken now because some of the cultural discussions happening throughout our community.
Yeah. Yeah, during high school, my father and I had a very tense relationship because as a 13-year-old, again, I had been exposed to Malcolm, and I made up my mind early on as a 13-year-old, I was dedicating my life to black liberation, period. And he thought I was brainwashed by some older people, and, so there was real tension. And I didn't know how to navigate all that tension. Plus, I was trying to figure out how do I go to school at Cass Tech, this kind of elitist school, and maintain this black consciousness I had gotten at Post. How do I move through that? I didn't have the proper counseling to figure out. So basically, I dropped out of school while in school. I was still technically enrolled, but while I was at Cass, I failed 10 classes, primarily because I wasn't going. And it was because I didn't know how to navigate what was going on in my head with what was happening in the objective world that I was living in. And of course, all that created lots of tension in my home with myself and my father primarily.
How did you go about mending that relationship? How did your father go about mending that relationship?
I'm not sure it ever completely got amended, to tell you the truth. I think over time, as he saw I was being consistent, after, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I'm still in it. 6 years, 10 years, I'm still in it. So he started to see I was serious about it. And there was a certain respect that developed. My mother she was quicker to start calling me by Malik. She was quicker to see that I was serious and respect the life I had chosen for myself. It was a little more difficult, I think, for my father. And so even he passed in 1989, just a few months before we started in Soderman Institute.
Wow.
So he never had a chance to see anything that occurred after that in my life. But even toward the end of his life, we had some real friction because I walked away from my job at Detroit Public Schools as a teacher in 1988 and started making Africa medallions.
I remember that story.
Right.
Hey, that's the story worth listening to that first podcast for, but continue.
And frankly, one of the reasons I started making Africa medallions was because I was caught up in a child support situation. I don't know if I said this on the first show or not. I was caught up in a child support situation, and they were taking so much money out of my check that I literally couldn't survive. And so I walked away from my job, kind of went into what people might call the shadow economy, and started making these medallions. And, we had a crew that would make them, a morning crew that would work and make them, and evening crew that would work and make them. And then we would go out to hip-hop clubs in the evening and sell the medallions. And also we'd sell to wholesale, to stores and what have you. So I was making more money hustling these medallions than I was making as a teacher in Detroit Public Schools. I never went back to Detroit Public Schools and have never worked a job since then that I didn't sign the paycheck on.
And in this, like, but you talk about that friction with your father, and I'm guessing that definitely is another one of those, because dads and we know men, especially black men in America. You said he worked at the post office. I'm guessing he probably worked till retirement there. So, like, he was, in my mind when I think of your age and when he was born and what he looks at as a real man and holding a family down. And you got these kids. What you doing? Quitting it? You don't even have the luxury of doing this.
Yes, exactly.
Like, I'm just thinking, just knowing the people in my family.
Yeah, that was the mindset I'm sure that he had. That I'm walking away from a so-called good job with health benefits and what have you, and I'm sure that's how he saw it. But I'm so glad I did, frankly.
Yeah.
And I wish we could have reconciled more deeply before he passed. And again, he passed in 1989, and I was able to be with him the last 2 days he was in the hospital before he passed.
Wow.
And so maybe there was some reconciliation that occurred then, and I was with him when he passed, which was a memorable experience on a number of levels. Seeing somebody leave this planet, and it was very similar to being there when my children were born. It was kind of just the opposite, kind of the energy going in the opposite way. But I served as maybe what people would call as a doula in some ways as he was making his transition, helping to massage his feet and helping him to stay comfortable and what have you. And afterwards, my aunt was like, "How did you know how to do that? How did you?" And it's like, I didn't. I just, I was just called, and I did what seemed to be the appropriate thing to do at that time. So we ended. He ended his life with me right there, and us, in love. For sure, but there was friction definitely during the last year of his life.
And in that, this is just me taking that same snapshot. I think your dad being born in a different era, because that same drive, that same fight, like you all at the same time, he may have been the closest of allies to you in a lot of the black liberation movement, just because the context of like how we see things would be completely different. Like if this were 40 years ago, this may be the Detroit is Different newspaper instead of the podcast with a whole different message where I may be, interviewing preachers or something. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? But I also think time has some of those snapshots, and that's where like I glean and I'm pulling from, just trying to piece together some of those wisdoms that, to make certain things make sense when I talk to younger people about like, let's look at this in a grander context of how and what and why things are functioning the way they do.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I got, and this will be, we can close here, is another long preface, but when I study a lot of people in black revolutionary and black liberation fights, it seems the older, like in the 20s, it's like, yo, we need to fight, we taking on the world. Rest in peace, Chokwe Lumumba, definitely another one of my big homies. And even Judge Morcom, rest in peace, Judge Morcom, like the fight's grandiose. But I've noticed the older in this fight, it becomes more focused around family, like direct community, like house to house. I want to get your take on that. And maybe I'm just, noticing just the shift and change. Like a Jimmy Boggs goes from the American Revolutionaries notebook to Detroit Summer, like, something more like one-on-one and less, taking on the whole machine. Like, why do you think that ends up happening?
Well, I'm not sure that ends up happening across the board. I'm not disagreeing with you. I need time to digest that and really think if I think that's true across the board. But I'll say that one of the things, many people were very naive in the late 60s and 70s, including myself as a youngster, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, where we actually thought that in the next 2-3 years, the revolution was going down and black people were going to be free. And in all fairness, the potential existed for that to happen if it hadn't been so violently suppressed by COINTELPRO. But still, we had a very short-range view of what revolution was. And, we didn't know it's this long, protracted, intergenerational process. And so if you have a short-term view and you think it's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, and it doesn't happen in 2 or 3 years, then many people start saying, well, I think what happened is many people changed the focus, and instead of trying to see how do we overturn the entire system, maybe started turning to, more community level programs and things like that. Although those programs existed in the 60s and 70s as well. But for me, I will say that I still have kind of a dual focus, that I'm down with the revolution. Mm-hmm. And that I think we need to be trying to see how do we undermine capitalism, how do we undermine what my brother Yusef is calling white hegemony, how do we in a series, radically undermine these systems, but at the same time, how do we transform ourselves? And so some of the transformation that took place, for example, at the Boggs Center, they started looking at, yes, we have the systemic change we have to make, but also we have to embrace our humanity. We have to make changes inside of ourselves and inside of our community. And so I think that thinking has become more predominant also. And so perhaps there's a more balanced approach. But the danger in that is that some people can get so far off into this, that we're transforming ourselves and we're practicing self-care, that the revolutionary aspect of the work leaves, as far as I'm concerned. And so I think we have to figure out a way to balance out, our own personal and community transformation with undying dedication to revolution.
I love it. As always, pure game. I can't wait to actually get that book in my hands. I'm sure, I'm gonna be like, hey, can I get the chapters that chose to not make it? Can I get the I guess in the studio edition?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of stories I can't tell because I can't name certain names, and some of that stuff would be the best selling stuff, but some of it I can't really say.
I got you. Well, definitely no. It's been always an honor.
It's my honor.
As Detroit is Difference 10 next year. So we may just reverse it. I want you to interview me or something like that. We're going to do the actor studio thing. And
I would love to do that. And, I think I told you I got a degree in radio and TV broadcasting. That's what I went to school and study. Yeah, so man. I did radio so many years on so many stations, WDET. I worked with a show on WCHB with Baba Malik Yakini in Sortima. I had a show on HPR.
Okay.
A show on the station that was owned by Detroit Public Schools. I can't even remember the name of it. DTR.
That was my first station.
So radio is definitely my background.
Okay.
And maybe you can help me come up to speed in the podcasting world.
Oh, anything. You were my first guest, so anything you want, you got. Definitely. I'm glad that you shared this, and also in the podcast family will be coming on Piper's show, and I'm sure other shows. I'm sure I don't know when they're gonna drop the with Maulana and Imani, when they're gonna drop that Get Brother. I know you were on that show one day when I pulled up. I'm like, oh, you got the OG in here. I'm like, that's always gonna be a great discussion. But being that you shared some of your oral traditions and thoughts, it's a pure honor, and I look to keep that going in a place where it's like, okay, this is one of my big homies that's opened up and gave some game.
Thank you.
In this platform.
It's an honor to be here.
All right, thank you.
Peace.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.